Hello, everyone. In this lesson, I suggest continuing to eliminate duplicate code, specifically these checks, meaning wait for some loading to display. If there's an error, return error. If not found, then idea not found. And as we see, we have this check for authorized or unauthorized, since in the future, we will have many pages that are available only to authorized users, or where it's necessary to verify that the requested entity exists, and so on. As we can see, similar code is used on many pages. Well, on the Edit Idea page and the View Idea page, it's essentially the same thing. Obviously, we can also write a wrapper for this. As per our usual approach, let's first see how it will be applied, and then we'll go through the wrapper itself. We will look at this using the Edit Idea page as an example, because this page will be significantly simplified. Look, thanks to the fact that we have a wrapper, we can safely delete all this. We can name this already, our const get idea page, and export it. We won't need this type anymore. It will be passed here automatically. But we need to apply our own wrapper. Our wrapper will be called withPageWrapper, and it will take the following object. Well, first, what do we have? Okay. Dig here, don't interfere. It's only for authorized users, so let's just write that it's only for authorized users. Then, we need a query here. Let's apply our query. A query to request an idea that we take from the route parameters, request it, and just return this query. What else is important here? We need to check for the existence of the requested idea, so we call checkExists. Here, our query result, which we declared here, comes in. And if in the query result, it's a function that will be called to check for the existence of the requested entity. If the idea is not null, it means checkExists passed. And if checkExists didn't pass, this message should be displayed. Then we need a check to determine if the user can access this page based on whether they are the author of the idea. Therefore, there's a checkExists, where besides the query result, the context of our front-end app is also passed. Here we also have me, meaning if me exists, and me ID equals the author of the idea. It's with a question mark here because, perhaps, it wasn't found, right? So, and if I exist and my ID is the same as the authors of this idea, then checkExists will pass. And if it doesn't pass, we'll see a message like this. And we also need that in the end, after all these operations, our idea from this query ends up here, into the idea. And for this, we will call setProps with this specification. So what are we writing here? That we have a query result, and we simply pass the query result data.idea into the idea. Our idea can be, if it passed all these checks, that means it definitely exists, and it's definitely not null. And that's why we can put an exclamation mark here, meaning that this type is not null. So, and that's why our idea comes here, as we see it. If we hadn't put this exclamation mark, we would have either an idea here or null. And we had problems with this because it may not exist, but it actually does. So now I'm forced to put an exclamation mark here, but ESLint will complain because it's bad practice. And I agree with it. In the next lesson, we'll improve the typing of this wrapper a bit, but there is already a lot here, so we'll deal with it for now. And it's actually not bad as it is, but not perfect. Good. That's it. We set the setProps, and thanks to this, we see that the idea will be what we declared here. If we wrote some other x on 23, here we would have x on x available with the number type. So, this is what our wrapper looks like. Well, it's logical to assume that we can apply it anywhere. It's universal for us. So it's not just for this page, it's for all pages. All right? Now let's analyze it. And here, of course, TypeScript is tougher because we need to understand what type is returned in U-square. And we need to understand what props are declared here to pass them in. So if you look, withPageWrapper is a function that returns another function, which we immediately call with this parameter. So that's it. It looks like this. It's convenient to apply, a bit tricky to attach. Let's look at the implementation. I created a file in the folder lib.pagewrapper.tsx. And what do we see here? A bunch of types and checks. But let's go from top to bottom and figure it out. Actually, it's better to go from bottom to top, in this case. Here's the function itself. The withPageWrapper, which we apply right here. Here it is, withPageWrapper. And as we see, it accepts PageWrapper props. Oh guys, honestly, there's just a lot of TypeScript stuff mixed in here. I'll try to explain it all now, but in practice, it's probably better to try writing it yourself again to understand it better. There's a lot here, but understanding it may only come with practice. An explanation won't be enough, but I hope it still helps you somehow to figure it out. Okay, so what's up? We are declaring our generics again. We have a certain tprops. We have a certain tQuery result. These generics are needed to somehow get the types of this use query and the types of this set props. They will also be passed to the type PageWrapper props we declared above. Let's take a look at them. So they are just passed here. Types can be passed inside types, and these generics can also be passed around. The only thing in PageWrapper props is the existence of some page is declared, but this is for internal use. That's why we wrote omit, because we need to remove page from this type, since page will be used only under the hood. And as I said, this PageWrapper, this thing returns a function, which we immediately call, and here we see that this PageWrapper returned a function. This function takes exactly that same page, and we take it from here. So we took this type and took from it the type of this page. This is the input parameter. Here it is. This is our page. We passed it here. And this function again returns a function. But why? Because that's exactly our React component, and it acts as a page wrapper, where we simply pass the page wrapper props and the page itself. So here we just divided the types. From here comes our main type, and everything is built around it. And in the page wrapper props, we removed the page from it, and here we pass the page separately, and in the end, everything goes into the page wrapper together. All right, I hope everything is clear. All right, let's move on. Everything is built around the page wrapper props type. Let's take a look at it. Now, this is the page wrapper type. All right, we'll get to that in a moment, okay? Let's start by sorting it out. So here's page wrapper, where all the logic of what's happening inside will be written. But before looking at the logic, maybe it's better to examine the type. Or maybe we should look at everything at once. Well, let's try to do it in some order. Page wrapper props. Here we describe the props that can be passed into this object, as well as the props for our page. All together, we describe here. Okay, here they are, our two generics, type props. The type extends some props. I set the props myself. Type props is just a record with a string key and any additional value. Okay, all right. This is just an auxiliary type that we declared beforehand and said it extends it. tQuery result extends query result. Query result is also a type that I declared, but under the hood, I used ustrpc query result. Query is a type that is exported from trpc itself. Okay, so we set query result, and most likely, tQuery result extends it, but it can also extend undefined. This is needed for cases when we have a viz page wrapper, for example, where we need to allow only authorized users, and yet we do not use any use query there. The component is the same, but there will be no query result. It will be undefined because it simply won't be declared there. Okay, so let's move on. Well, for example, we have a redirect authorized property. Later, if we declare it, it will mean that from this page, we should redirect those who are already authorized. For example, the sign-in page. If a person is already logged in, they need to be automatically redirected somewhere else. If an authorized person tries to access that page, we still shouldn't show it to them and should redirect them somewhere else because it's not for them, right? Then we have authorized only. It means that if a person is not authorized, they will see an error. With the next title and the following message, we have check access. It is a function that will be called to check if a person has access to this page or not. Well, specifically, yes, whether they are the author of the idea or not. It takes in helper props. What are helper props? This is also a type that I defined, and it takes in also a generic with query result, because right here we can see check access. So we need to know the query result, which was returned from here. And we need to know the context, which is our app context, right? So here we have to pass the query with the query result to get it here. The context here is known. This is simply our app context, imported from our application context. Okay? Our next query result, this is, again, our generic, which in fact should already be successfully processed because here, the query result can initially be in a loading state or an error state. But we know that if it reached check access, because there were checks before that, we'll later look at the code to see the order in which everything was called. Here, we know that it is successfully resolved. How to determine that it is successfully resolved? Well, we defined another auxiliary type query success result, which takes the type the query result, and again, we use a helper from tRPC to determine the success of this procedure. For this, we pass the data we received from the query result and indicate that it is definitely not nullable because there was no error and no loading. That's it. These are the types it accepts. And we also pass null, indicating that there was no error. Here, you can go to this type itself, take a look. You need to pass data and error here. These are the types of the tRPC itself. We can go inside the library and see what their types look like. All right, so we have a special wrapper to get a successful result for this specific query. Okay, so if we have a query result, this is the condition. Initially, we showed here that we say query result everywhere, indicating that it's either extended query result or undefined. And what are we showing here? If it is indeed an extended query result and not undefined, then in the query result, we will have a successful outcome of this procedure. If it is not an extended query result, then let it be undefined in the query result. Well, that makes sense. This is for cases when we are not using useQuery in our wrapper. So in this case, our query result is undefined. And in this case, we have a successful declaration of this type. All right. Right. Here are our helper props. Returning, we've got the helper props here. We use them here. Thanks to this, we see our query result successfully resolved, and we see our context. Then, check exists. It has exactly the same type. The only thing is, if this check fails, we will see this title and this message. Then we have the function, useQuery itself, this one. And it's known that it doesn't take any parameters, but returns a query result tag. And this is where our generic is used. This is where our generic acquires a specific type. Here we specified that it just exists, but here we determine where it comes from. It comes from the return type of the useQuery function. It is because we returned this from useQuery that our generic query result tag has this specific type. That's all. We define the query result tag here, and then we have the function setProps, which allows us to pass some props further into our page. And here we see that this is just a function that again takes the same helpers, including our query result, and it also takes context. We just didn't need it here, so we didn't call it. So here, there is context. We took the query result and returned an object from here. I remind you that this construct is the same as doing it like this. This is the same, it just looks longer. All right, you can do it like this. We return an object from here, and here we define our second of two generics, tprops. The return value of the function tprops, or rather from the function setProps, is tprops. And this is exactly where tprops is assigned the type of this object. And further, we say that our page is a React functional component. It's a native React type. Here, we pass tprops. We declared tprops here, and here we use them. And we see that our ID accepted the type that was returned from the idea here. This is such a combination of generics and wrapper types. All right, let's now look at the implementation. Everything will become a bit clearer. All right, here's our page wrapper. What is it? It's really just a React component that we use here. So in the end, it is our output component into which all our props declared here are flown. And the page component itself, which is declared here, turns out, is right here. This is the page component. These are all the other props. Okay, we pass them here. Let's look at the implementation. Again, the same generics if you look at the code, but they repeat a lot here. So here they are, yes. And you must describe them like this, or it's quite challenging to use or very pleasant. There. At the same time, honestly, in most companies, wherever you work, you will see that there are no such wrappers. There. For two reasons. Because they were too lazy to write them, and they went everywhere rewriting the same code. Then, when they decide to replace the loading with a nice spinner, they'll go through all the pages and replace it there. You won't have this issue. See, you can just go to dispatch wrapper and change what you need, and it will apply to all the pages. The second reason is that often their designers create strange projects where each page has unique special behaviors. If you get a good designer and design your product well together, the logic and behavior of your pages will be uniform, and accordingly, you will be able to write such wrappers. If you ever work at a company and write such a wrapper for their project, everyone will carry you around on their shoulders. All right, let's move on. So, all these props, the types you just discussed, and that page, which arrived, as I said, from here. This is the page, and these are all the other props. Good. And here we go. We took navigate from use, navigate from React Router DOM. All right, we set it for ourselves. We got the context, it's useApp context, which we declared in the file with the context of our web application. We took query result, specifically through this kind of structure. As far as we know, in our use context in a query, this may be a function, or it might not be passed at all. That's why we call it with a question mark. This means that if it's there, the function will be called. And if it's not, the function won't be called, and it will be undefined here. Here we see that it's either a query result or undefined. Then we simply determine if a redirect is needed. A redirect is needed if we need to redirect authorized users. So, and we are authorized. We are authorized if, naturally, there's a me in the context. If there's no me in the context, which means it's null, then no redirect is needed. That's all. Redirect needed. Then React hook use effect. Hook use effect is called on the first render, and also on any subsequent ones, if these dependencies change. Well, navigate will never change because it's basically fixed, right? But redirect needed, well, theoretically it can change. That is, we could have logged in, right? Or we could go to another page where a redirect for authorization is required. Okay? So this is the dependency of the use effect. And this function will be called on the first render and on each subsequent one if these values, one of them, changes. At least one of them. That's all. And in this function, if redirect needed, we require navigating to the Get All IDs routes page. Well, it's just intended by me that if a person is authorized and tries to break into the login page, we will still redirect them, roughly speaking, to our main page, and we pass an object with options as the second argument to navigate here. And here we say, replace true. What does this mean? We will redirect him, and if he tries to click the back button, he will return not to the sign-in page, but to the one he was on before. So we didn't add this page to the browsing history, but replaced the current one with this page. So he went to the sign-in page, and we took it in the history and replaced it with Get All IDs routes. It will just be more convenient. If you don't set this replace true, nothing terrible will happen, but there will be an issue. If he clicks the back button, he will go back to the sign-in page, it will redirect him again, and he will essentially get stuck. He won't be able to use the back button. Therefore, it's better to keep replace true, of course. Okay? And what is important here? We called all hooks, everything that starts with use, before we started replacing, so those checks and do the return. I remind you that hooks must always be in the same sequence and not optional. If we placed a hook later, React would complain and everything could break. All right. And then we simply work with the query result. Again, if we have loading, is fetching, or redirect needed, we show loading. So it's clear why we show loading. That's because our query result is literally loading if it exists, and loading is needed. And if redirect is needed, we show loading because we don't need anything else. Our user will be redirected, and until the redirection happens, let them see the loading message. Well, loading and loading. Then it will be redirected. So, this checks for two things at once. Loading the query and waiting for a redirect. Okay, then the query loaded. No redirect was needed. Maybe there was an error in the query result. Again, if the query result existed at all, because we might not have called any query in that wrapper. All right, if there's an ISEROR, we call the error page component. I created it beforehand, so I just created an error page component in the components. Why not just error page? Well, that's the agreement. We put everything that ends with page into the pages folder, but it's not a standalone page. It's more like a component that will be used in many places. That's why I want to call it the error page component. It simply takes a title name and returns a segment with a title and a red alert with a specified message. And if nothing is passed, it will return a default title. Oops, error, and something went wrong. All right, so going back to PageWrapper. So if there was an error, we'll return the error page component with this message. And the title will be oops, error, and the message that came from our backend about the error. Okay, let's assume there was no error. Moving on, let's see if it's authorized only, here. And I'm not authorized. Then we also throw an error with the title, authorized only title, which we passed here, or which was set here by default. There, and with the message that we also passed here in this wrapper. Here we passed authorized only, and we didn't pass a custom message. Therefore, the defaults will be used. Good. Then we declare an object with our help props. Remember the ones we declared right here, because next we will pass them into our validation functions. That's all. Helper props are just CTX and query result. You need to insert this thing for TypeScript, because if you remove it, we will get errors. It will complain about possible type mismatches and so on. You can dig into it and be amazed, but when you write code, sometimes you really need to do these things. So I said that query result is something you don't need to worry about. You can also use any, but it's more professional to write never. This means that later in the code, I'm not going to use query result directly. You should just trust that the type here is correct. Sometimes you need to do this in libraries. In your own code, you're virtually not allowed to do this. But in your micro libraries, it's normal. Fine. This way, we bypassed the type complaints, because we know we'll pass everything correctly later. Okay, helper props. And also, if we have a function check access, which we passed from edit idea page, here's check access. Then we call it, well, we send it to apply access denied. Access denied. If check exists, failed. Suppose access denied. Then error page company displays the appropriate check access title and check access message that we either passed or were set. That's it. Great. We passed the access check. Now, the check for entity existence. Here we go. We call the function exactly the same. Check exists. Not exists. If not exists, then error page company, check exists title, and check exists message. Here. Great. Everything is here. Let's say we passed all these checks. Our query loaded. We are authorized. And there was a check for this. It passed, and so on. Or there was no check. In short, if we somehow managed to pass all these checks, then we call the setProps function. Again, if it was provided and we needed some props. Here, we call it if it exists, and it returns us a certain object. Here, and we call this object props, and we pass them to the page component, and this is that component. Here, we pass it there and return it. That's all. And here's our page wrapper. Just a simple wrapper like this. All right, I recommend you spend some time on your own now. The entire code is attached below in the lesson. So, try to figure it out. You can try to write it yourself first. You can just use it. Perhaps in the future, you'll need some additional checks. It's not that hard to copy it and add something new. Here you go. It's all possible. You can change the logic inside the implementation. Even simpler. Inside here, fundamentally, there was nothing too complicated. Here. So we've covered the wrapper itself. Now let's go through and apply it to our other pages. Okay, let's. That is all. To edit idea page. We've already applied it. It integrated here perfectly. Let's move on. Okay. Well, let's go to new idea page. What kind of check can we have here? Well, we just need to check if the user is authorized. I only want to allow those who are already authorized. It will look like this. Okay, from PageWrapper. Function, yes. Right, checking. Well, we can now go and check how it works. Here we have the new idea page. Look, we're entering here. We are now authorized, and it let us in perfectly. Let's try to log out and access this page. Please authorize. This page is available only for authorized users. There you go. And it's done with such a short code. Again, I say, it's either hard to write, very, very nice to use, right? New idea page, improved. Now let's go to the sign-in page. What's important on the sign-in page is redirecting users who come here if they are already authorized. Here's a simple wrapper too. Redirect, authorized. And considering that we've created such a wrapper, we don't even need this navigate anymore because it'll happen automatically. Because now, when a user is authorized, it will trigger invalidate, re-trigger getMe in our app context, and accordingly, the user will become authorized. Our this page wrapper will see it and redirect them in this hook. So, again, the code has become shorter and simpler. Moving on. Sign up page. Well, the logic is similar. Here we also just need to redirect those who are already authorized. Right. This is a function. Yes. This page wrapper, redirect. Authorized. And we don't need navigate here anymore. Yes. Okay, let's check that it works. Let's go to the sign-in page. Our user, sign in. And yet, the redirect occurred. Okay, this also works. Let's move on. Let's go to the view ID page. Okay, well, here will be the following code. Okay. We don't need all this now. but we need this. It's possible to mix up with the brackets. So, good. That, there is... Look, here we are requesting useQuery again for getID. ID is taken from the route parameters. We check for the existence of the idea and set setProps. Here, just to avoid writing the hook useMe again, and make the component super primitive without hooks, we used context here and passed them here. And we use it here. It's really a very convenient wrapper. I highly recommend everyone to use it. Good. View ID, page fixed. Let's check our types. Haven't we forgotten anything anywhere in the point? Yes, excellent. Here, all IDs.page is working for us. The page works. Suppose we found a non-existent one. Not found, ID not found. Everything just works. So, what advice do I want to give? Don't be afraid to write these wrappers. If you see some code that's constantly repeating, extract it. Extract it into a wrapper, practice. It's actually very interesting and greatly boosts your productivity in future development. And again, once you've written this page wrapper, when you start a new project, just copy your old page wrapper. And if something needs tweaking, you'll tweak it. That's it. So this is your wealth, your development capital, your assets. Create them, use them. Make projects quickly and with pleasure. All right, thanks everyone. Let's move on.